Welcome everybody to planning and zoning meeting. Let's start off with roll call. We have Ruth Ann,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Cody,
Yes.
Lynn,
Yes.
Chris,
Here.
and Ren.
Here.
Okay. Everybody's here. We have full board tonight. Let's go ahead and start off and review our minutes from our last meeting. Did anybody see any changes that needed made?
I didn't notice any.
Dean, you weren't here last time, were you? No. So that was the only thing.
Is he on there? I noticed that too. That's what I get for using a template.
Yeah, Ryan. Any other changes? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes as amended.
So moved.
A motion by Lynn,
Second.
second by Chris Thompson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Can I
Okay.
take care of some business before you get into the, some of you members haven't been sworn in.
Oh, yes, we better do that.
Thought we got sworn in last time.
Who?
Some of
didn't?
some of you did,
Yeah,
but
somehow.
not everybody, because somebody was missing.
I'll find you if you're not sworn in.
This has nothing to do with your swearing in, but I made a mistake on the printing, so you can have these for nothing.
Well, we got a new one.
Okay, Chris,
No, that's your old one.
this is your right one. It was always this one, but that's what council.
Oh,
says.
this one's brown.
So I thought
Okay,
as
yeah.
long as,
I was-
so now you're all.
I'm not special anymore.
Ran?
No.
Right here.
This is
So we
yours
need to
now.
Sign these?
Well, my old one was
Oh, it's
brown.
brown. Oh,
Everybody
okay.
else's was black.
And mine didn't have planning and zoning on
Oh, okay. And then I have the others. Okay, do you want to all stand? We'll just do it all at the same time. Just repeat after me.
I think, who didn't do it last time?
Pardon?
Who didn't do it last time?
She hasn't done it. I don't have it both well. Okay.
Or did you do
it.
it?
So who do you need one
We did it
from?
last
We did
time. We
last
just
Because we did it,
have the
but we
paper.
didn't, you didn't have the papers.
Oh, well then you're all, okay, just sign them.
Because we did it, but that's what I thought.
That's too long, I forget.
Yeah.
Great. Just as long as we
What day
get
was
them.
that?
That was a whole month ago.
I know.
Okay,
Let's see if that pen works.
Here's an extra one. Here.
now, we've got that straightened away. Let's move on to our training.
That it?
That's it.
All right.
So, Mayor Bird, you're up with our
Well-
training.
I'm unfortunately your only source of knowledge tonight, and I apologize. No, I've been talking with the city attorney and talking with Steve as well. And anyway, we got thinking, there's been some changes in tradition, I guess you could say, the way that things have been done versus the way that things, according to law, should be done. And so I thought it was a good time for us to go over state code, our own codes, and make sure that the Planning and Zoning Commission understands their role in assisting the council as legislators and enforcing the ordinances that we currently have. One of the things that I've noticed is I think in the past, I don't think the Planning and Zoning Commission has felt like they've had the authority to make decisions and to do things without going to the council. And so first and foremost, I want you to know that once an ordinance is created and we have legislation in place, especially when it comes to land uses, you guys are the end all say all. Along with Dean, when you guys make a decision, that's a final decision. Last council meeting, there was a decision that was made in the planning and zoning for a conditional use permit for Moon Lake. And then that came before the council, and I was confused because, well, historically, that's been the case. Is it goes to the planning and zoning commission and the decision was made, or it was a suggestion, and then it'd go to the council and council would ratify it. However, if you look in our ordinances, the council is an appeals committee, and the planning and zoning has the authority to make that decision. And so the only reason Moon Lake would have needed to come to the council is if they were trying to appeal one of the, a decision that was made or something like that. And so we'll talk about that a little later, but I just wanted to start from the basics and go through and talk about in state code what the powers and duties of the planning commission is. We'll try to go through it fairly quickly because I think most have a fairly good understanding, but I just want to make sure that we're not missing anything. And really, this should empower you guys to be able to do those things and know that to have confidence in that. Another thing I've noticed is there's been some, we haven't had recommendations come to the council because it's been, people have abstained, and so we haven't had a majority vote, and so it can't come to the council as a yes, we approve this, or yes, we suggest this, or no, we don't. It's been just kind of left up to the council to decide, and really, you guys have that authority to do that, and you should feel empowered to do that. And understanding our role as planning and zoning commission, I think will help us know exactly, feel comfortable making those decisions, I guess. So first and foremost, starting out with state code, this is Title 10, 9A302, Planning Commission Powers and Duties. The Planning Commission shall make a recommendation to the legislative body for a general plan and amendments to the general plan. So we just have the general plan done, the master plan. And I think the planning and zoning was involved with that. They are to make recommendations for land use regulations, an appropriate delegation of power to at least one designated land use authority to hear and act on a land use application, an appropriate delegation of power to at least one appeal authority to hear and act on an appeal from a decision of the land use authority. So you guys are there to act on land applications. So when somebody has a building permit or something like that, or they want to do something and they come to the planning and zoning, you have the authority to act. If there's an appeal, that power has been delegated to the city council at this point for an appeal. And so if somebody doesn't like the decision that the land use authority has made, then they'll come to the city council and appeal that decision. But if it's approved and there's no appeal or anything else, that's it. Application process that may include a designation of routine land matters that upon application proper notice will receive informal streamlined review and action if the application is contested, and shall protect the right of each applicant and third party to require formal consideration of any application by a land use authority, applicant, adversely affected party, or municipal officer or employee to appeal a land use authority decision to a separate appeal authority, which we already talked about a little bit, and participant to be heard in each public hearing on a contested application. So nothing in this section limits the right of a municipality to initiate or propose the action described in this section. So that's basically your job as far as that is to make suggestions to the council and even act when there's an ordinance that's already created according to the laws that we have in place. Let me jump to the next. Are there any questions on that so far?
So I have a question. If someone, let's say they make a decision and the person doesn't like the decision, would they then say if they want to appeal it, they would have to tell them, if you want to appeal it, you have to take it to the city council, or would they try to appeal it here first?
No.
No.
Take it to the city council. And we'll get to our ordinances here in just a second. And it talks about, it sets the process that somebody will have to go through for an appeal, and it specifies the time, how much time they have to appeal that decision and everything else, but that's a good question.
and maybe just a comment.
Yeah.
On what you're talking about. Where you set conditional use on the usage for Moon Lake, where you recommended a hearing, the way I'm understanding it, we should have set a hearing for planning and zoning the following month. And then if there was any appeals passed there, it should have gone to council.
Yeah, for the conditional use, and we can look at that in both areas, but for a conditional use, instead of having the public hearing at the council, we should have had the public hearing in the planning and zoning meeting. And then make a decision there.
Should that be brought the same time that they bring the plans, or should that be brought and then we hold it separate from that?
Now, see, one of the things that we want to do too is we don't want people to be 4, 5, 6 months trying to get something done.
Okay.
So we can have a public hearing the same day that we're looking at the plans. One thing that I like to do in the council is make sure that we have the plats and all the information at least a week in advance of our meetings. So that those that are making the decisions have time to look at that. Because what you're wanting to do as a planning and zoning commission is compare it with our ordinances. And that's the other thing I want to make sure you guys know where to find that information in our ordinances. So you can compare those things that are being brought before you with our ordinances. And Dean's going to do the same, and he'll be here to make recommendations as well. But if they fit within our ordinances, you approve. If they don't fit within our ordinances, you deny. There is no, well, I don't really feel like that's fair or not fair, right? You guys are an administrative executive body, meaning you don't make decisions that way, and neither does the council. See, the council technically shouldn't, if something's stated in an ordinance, we should not go against our ordinances and make a decision outside.
Well, not only that, but technically we can't. Correct? If it says in the ordinance this is allowed, then we can't disallow it without some kind of extenuating circumstances.
Correct.
If it's allowed.
On my
it's
phone.
not a conditional use.
Well, you
Well,
can, but you shouldn't. You're, as a rule of the planning, is you're supposed to make, your decisions are supposed to be based upon, we're supposed to rule on the authority and the rules been in place and decide if it fits in within those boundaries.
Right,
We're not deciding on our opinion.
correct.
Right.
So it's not, if we feel like it should be based on feelings, it should be based upon what we feel is allowed and what's not allowed.
Right.
Right.
That's why I said you guys
I feel really
should be able to have confidence in voting yes or no, because you should be able to look at the ordinance and say that fits in the ordinance and we're going to allow it, or no, it doesn't fit within the ordinance and we're going to deny it. Now, if it's allowed, that's, no big deal. Sometimes what I think happens is those decisions are tough because maybe our law says one thing, but we may feel like it's not that big of a deal. And maybe, but that's not our role. And even as a council, we shouldn't be doing that. If we want to allow something that's not allowed in the ordinance, then we need to look at changing the ordinance. And that's where you guys come into play. As you would say, we would make the recommendation that we change the ordinance, but we would not allow a use that's not provided for in the ordinance until that's made. That's what I think historically that's happened, and we have a lot of people that have been maybe have gotten the benefit of getting something approved that's not okay within our ordinances, and then we've had people be denied for the same things, and so you get this frustration in our community, and we don't want to do that. So, yeah, Lynn.
I was just thinking, we had the discussion about the one that wanted to have the little building in their backyard, a little commercial building, and sometimes what's happened is, it may or may not, if it isn't permitted, but there are other instances of it that exist in the city. That's a problem sometimes.
That's a problem too. And one of the things that I mentioned in our city council the night that individual came is we need to do a better job of enforcement as well. If we're going to adhere to our ordinances and our codes, then we also have to enforce those as we see things that aren't compliant. Does that make sense? So it's fair for everyone. We've got to make it a fair playing field for everyone. And that's really what we're trying to do.
Well, if you're,
yeah.
really, if you're not gonna enforce it, there's no point in having it, the ordinance,
Right.
because it becomes pointless at that stage.
And the problem with that ordinance was it flat stated, it wasn't a conditional use, it was a condition of use if you have a business at home. And that was the whole issue, is we have to change the entire ordinance to be able to address that, other than it's not permitted. And that was the problem, and that was the problem getting it across, is we have to change this entire ordinance for everybody within the city. It's not just addressing one person, and it was not conditional use.
Yeah.
It was conditions of use.
And yeah, there's some confusion, I think, too, as we talk about conditional uses and variances and those types of things. And what we need to remember is in our code, or in our ordinances, it should specify the allowed uses, and then it'll specify uses that can be done but are conditional uses. And those conditional uses have to be spelled out as what things need to take place to allow that conditional use to be done in that area. Does that make sense? So, for example, Moon Lake was a perfect example of that. When they came in and they asked for a conditional use to be able to put their transformer or
Substation.
substation in.
Mhm.
In our ordinance, it did specify as a conditional use that a substation could be a conditional use in that zoning. And then it gave recommendations as to how to mitigate the negative impacts that substation would impose in that area. And then it's your job to identify which negative impacts those are, and then set specific conditions on that to mitigate those negative impacts. Does that make sense? And then as you guys do that, that becomes what they have to do. But it's all spelled out in the ordinance. You can't say, well, I think you should, pave the road in there, or, I mean, gravel, I think, is definitely, but you can't get, well, I think you have a curb and gutter. Those types of things, whatever it is. Just whatever's conditions are set forth that are already in the ordinance.
So when we said that maybe need a fence, why that,
That was in there as
Oh,
a
was that in
condition
there?
that we can
Well,
ask him to do.
Gravel, the justification, in there, it says you can give conditions for emergency use.
Mhm.
And so we felt like that if there's a fire, it needed a good enough road that the fire truck could get back there. And so that's why so that's the condition we based the
Well,
gravel on.
I looked at it as mud, coming in and out of there. You are coming off a paved road, and so tracking mud and everything. I think what you guys did in that instance was spot on. And it passed just how you guys had it presented. There was some hiccup, some question as to the privacy fence versus just a regular fence, but they were willing to do that. But I think you guys did a fantastic job with that.
Let me just add one thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't here, but I did review the meeting on video. The one thing I thought was done right, it was conditional use. So you brought up the section on conditional uses, because when you assign conditional uses, you can't pick them out of the air. They have to be declared. And we have to have them declared and how we're gonna assign them. And I thought that was the right thing to do, was go to our conditional uses and go through them. That's what y'all did, I felt, was pick and choose what applied to this one here. And I thought that was really good.
Yeah. We can go to 306. I jumped ahead a little bit. This is
Something
just-
funny, JR.
Yeah,
So you have the different extremes. So Carolyn will remember that we actually had some of the things that were being passed by planning and zoning. The council actually asked for things to start to come to them. And
I was on the council and I thought that was ridiculous, but yeah.
so the funny thing is now we're working with Dutch John, and the planning and zoning has gone rogue. And they're starting to pass all these things, all these requirements on developers, and they're not running them by council.
See, here's the deal, and this is where the separation of power lies. And here's how we stay safe in that. And that's why it's good to understand our relationship between the council and the planning and zoning. The council sets the law, the rules. They're the legislators, so they set the ordinances. Planning and zoning enforces the ordinances. If there's a question as to whether something fits within that ordinance or not, or whether we want to see a change with that ordinance because maybe we want to allow a use that's not allowed, that recommendation goes to council. Council then creates an ordinance that will allow that. It will then in turn go back to the planning and zoning commission and then to the council again. So that is quite a long process to get an ordinance changed.
But it should be.
Yeah,
That particular instance should be, because if it's too easy to change the ordinances, then they're gonna be changing all the time and nobody will be able to keep track of anything.
exactly. But once we have the ordinance set, it should be a streamlined process. They come to the planning and zoning looks at the ordinance, says, yeah, it's finished, boom, done. It's that easy. And it doesn't come before council unless somebody says, well, I don't like that decision. And then if they come before council to get an appeal, they better have some substantial evidence, new evidence that they didn't have before, you know, to get that decision that appealed, or it stands. We shouldn't, as a council, make a decision other than what the planning and zoning has said or made, unless we have substantial evidence, new evidence that says that could be allowed. We have to, council needs to understand, and we're going through this too, that we don't have the ability to make a decision on a fly like that either. Be like, well, I think we feel like that's okay, so we're just gonna let it happen. I mean, that's happened in the past, but it should not happen. So anyway, does that kind of, let's just read this real quick. The land use authority shall apply the plain language of land use regulations. That's what we just talked about. So that's what your job is. If a land use regulation does not plainly restrict a land use application, the land use authority shall interpret and apply the land use regulation to favor the land use application. So that's, in the instances that we've had recently, there has been definite, we have the regulations spelled out pretty clear as to what we should do. Very seldom will this happen, and if it does, that's when we would expect the planning and zoning to come to us and say, look, we have this situation, we went ahead and approved it, but we need to make sure that we put that in our ordinance, so the next time we see this, we make the same decision for the next person in line. Does that make sense? And then we go through the process of changing the ordinance. A land use decision of a land use authority is an administrative act, even if a land use authority is the legislative body. So, and that's what I kind of talked about before, it's an administrative act, meaning you're not there to make a decision to legislate, but just to enforce what's already there. Any questions on that? Okay, and then it goes into, I have some with conditional uses and things like that. This is super boring, I'm sorry, but I hope this helps, and you can find this anywhere, le.utah.gov. Title 10, 9 is land uses, and then the whole ordinance code is stated there. Let's go to 507. So conditional uses, a municipality may adopt a land use ordinance that includes conditional uses and provisions for conditional uses that require compliance with standards set forth in an applicable ordinance. A municipality may not impose a requirement or standard on a conditional use that conflicts with the provision of this chapter or other state or federal law. A land use authority shall approve a conditional use if reasonable conditions are proposed or can be imposed to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use in accordance with applicable standards. That's kind of what we already talked about a little bit with conditional use. But all those things are to be spelled out in our ordinances as far as what conditions we're going to put and to mitigate those impacts, and then it's your job to make sure that you use those things that are in our ordinances to mitigate those. The requirement described in subsection 2AI to reasonably mitigate anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed conditional use does not require elimination of the detrimental effects. That means we're just trying to offset them, we're not trying to eliminate them. If the land use authority proposes reasonable conditions on proposed conditional use, the land use authority shall ensure that the conditions are stated on the records. And I don't know if we did that on the last one, but we need to make sure when you guys make a decision, whatever decisions you make and conditions you set need to be part of that record so that the property owner knows exactly, and we have a record of exactly what's to be enforced, especially with Dean as he's inspecting and everything else. He needs to know what things need to be done.
So what do we need to do to be done on the record?
We just need to make sure that we have a record of the conditions that are set so that they can be followed through with. And I don't know, when it came to planning and zoning, and I don't know that, Don, did you feel that way? It didn't seem like there was a straightforward.
Yeah, I didn't.
But not a big deal. We just, in the future, we just need to make sure that as we set those conditions, they're written in on a record, something that.
Were they included in the motion or?
Yeah, I think it was in the motion.
I don't think the problem was with the council as much as Jer said, tradition, they came to a meeting that they shouldn't have come to begin with to discuss it or have us talk about it. And so as a council, I didn't have it in front of me to know what was decided, what you guys had decided. Does that make sense? So, and there wasn't really appeal. It was one person concerned about whether they have the privacy fence or not in the slats or whatever. And I agree with Jerry, you guys did exactly the way it should have been done. Moon Lake, the person here said, yeah, we're fine with that. We'll go ahead and put the slats in. The person that came to not really complain, just make sure the privacy slots were there, was fine with that. Everybody was good. It just, the city council, and like Jerry said, he wasn't expecting it on the agenda. And so when it came up, we were all kind of just caught off guard. So if it's written down so that if someone does come appeal, we can check it. Plus, you can then check to verify this is what you were told to do. You know, this is.
So if we were to do it again, we would have had the meeting we had, and it would have had a public hearing at the meeting.
Well, we don't have to have a
Then-
public hearing.
That's what
You're
that's
right.
what I want to get into.
And I brought that up because even in state code, it says you do not have to have a public hearing for a conditional use permit. My thought is.
Yeah. Should we though?
Yeah.
You should.
Yeah.
But you don't have to. And I mentioned that to Wayne when he was here, because he's like, well, I didn't even get notified. And so I told him, I said, well, technically we don't have to. And I read in the code where it states that, and I said, technically we don't have to, but.
Good public relations.
I thought we'd asked that in the meeting, we'd asked that there would be notification sent for the council meeting.
You did, and there was, it was scheduled for public
But it shouldn't have
hearing.
gone to the council meeting.
We should have just adjourned
We
that.
should have had it
And then sent out the notifications and then had them come back to us
for a public hearing.
with the public
Correct.
hearing.
Correct, that's what we should have done, continued it, the vote until the next following meeting and then had a public hearing.
Actually, if we would have done it perfect, we would have, when they applied, we would have anticipated all this and then had it all in one meeting.
That's a big question I have for you, because in our conditional use, it says a public hearing is not necessary. I'm gonna have another issue probably come up next month, and that's a question I wanted to raise while we were covering this. Because I don't know if we need a hearing or not, it's for you to decide.
It's
You can't decide.
for you to decide or to decide. You're also listed, the building inspector or the planning and zoning.
Well, I'll bring the issue up.
So if you felt like there need to be a public hearing, or if we need to feel like it, and if we feel like that any time that there's conditional use, we feel like there should be a public hearing, then we can give you guys and say, hey, you know, if there's a public, then we could probably make that determination. And if we feel like they should be notified,
You can't mean, the big difference is 10 days getting on the docket or 3 weeks to advertise for a public hearing. That's the whole difference right there.
no, it's not 3 weeks.
It's
No, but
it's
it
2.
takes 3 weeks because of the way the paper publishes.
One thing that we've got to remember too is it's only 1 week, right? Advertising.
Some are two.
It's 2 weeks if we're doing a land use ordinance change. I know that's 2 weeks, but we'll have to look in there. I think it's only 1 week. But.
I don't know, I thought it just had to be on the public notice website if it's just a public meeting, just needs to go on the public notice
Yeah,
website and post it on the door. It doesn't have to go to the paper.
We're talking about a public hearing.
Public hearing.
Totally different.
Okay.
Public hearing, you have to have a certain amount of notice. Public meeting, 24 hours, that's it. So, one of the things I want to consider though, while we're talking about this, is, so I've been over to Duchesne County many times to do changes, zoning changes, those types of things. And I can tell you what I get as a property owner when I go over to Duchesne County. I get a packet. Well, it's pretty thick, but it has quite a few questions and everything else. And I have to, as a property owner, I have to fill that packet out and I have to tell them why I'm doing this and why I want to do this and everything else. I think it's a pretty good practice. And then what happens is Mike Hyde takes that packet and then he mails it out. Once the packet's returned with the money, the application and the money and everything, they then take that and mail it off to all the property owners. And it's specified, it has to be within 300 feet. Anyone within 300 feet of the affected property needs to be notified. And then that would be the time to arrange for a public hearing, in my personal opinion. And then it would come before the planning and zoning, the public hearing's already done. You guys have a packet that's been filled out by the property owner with maps and everything that wants to be done, that you can have a week, at least a week before your meeting, that you can study and compare with our ordinances. And then when you come, you know exactly what's going on. You know, you've looked at the ordinances and you know what to do. And I see that as being a process that has worked for them, and maybe a process that we need to fine tune a little bit that could help with these types of things.
If it's subdividing and ordinances, we do not require a public hearing. And so we would have to change our ordinance to do this because and actually I've been reviewing this because these are the things for clarification, you know, with council, because with it, and that's another thing. The way I read it, if it doesn't put council in something that we're acting on, then it stops here. And in the ordinance, if it states zoning and then council, then we do take it to council on all the subdividing. There's no hearings, but everything is bumped up to council for final approval in the subdivision process, which is the thing from a lot split up.
Right. And so these are things that we would ask you to consider too, as far as what are our processes currently and what can we fine tune and tweak and improve on. And so that might be one we look at, and that's Title 16, if anybody's wanting to know, in Roosevelt ordinances, it's Title 16 is subdivisions, Title 17 is zoning. But I'll give thoughts. Let's see. So we went through conditional uses. There was one other thing I found in state code that pertained to, and it pertains to subdivisions, and that's in 602. We'll jump right there real quick. I'm just trying to do a brief overview of everything, most everything that you guys are involved with and what your responsibility is. And then, I'm looking at state code first because we can't do anything we can be more restrictive than state code, but we can't be more
Lax.
lax than state code. So we're gonna go to them and just make sure that the foundation's set, and then we'll go to our own ordinances and see how they're set up, and then that may be where we look at it and say, you know, we need to make a few changes, or we have some suggestions for changes. So this is just for subdivisions, the planning commission shall review and provide a recommendation to the legislative body on any proposed ordinance that regulates the subdivision of land in the municipality. So you see, the legislative body really cannot ever change a land use ordinance without it coming through planning and zoning. And the reason for that, and the reason that the planning and zoning is appointed, is because we want an objective board to make those decisions, because land use is probably the most, not probably, the most sensitive issues that we have to deal with. And we don't want politicians, elected officials making decisions based on popularity. We want people that are more objective and that are away from that political scene making those decisions. So everything that we do, land use, has to come through you guys. We should never see an ordinance or anything that you guys have not either recommended or that we haven't recommended to you for review before it comes back to us for final approval. Review and make a recommendation to the legislative body on any proposed ordinance that amends the regulation of the subdivision of land in the municipality. Provide notice consistent with section 10(9)(a)(205). Now that means the notices of public hearings and those types of things. Hold a public hearing on the proposed ordinance before making the planning commission's final recommendation to the legislative body. A legislative body may adopt, modify, revise, or reject an ordinance described in subsection that the planning commission recommends. A legislative body may consider a planning commission's failure to make a timely recommendation as a negative recommendation if the legislative body has provided for that consideration by ordinance.
So that's really saying if there's a proposed change in the ordinance or some sort of addition to the ordinance, whatever, they should actually have the public hearing, and then they would make the recommendation to the city council, and the city council would decide based on their recommendation and what information is provided.
Right.
But we shouldn't have to do unless we initiate it or something, but even then, they should still,
Yeah, we could initiate it, but it still has to go through
the planning and
planning and
zoning.
zoning, and they have to have a public hearing.
And doesn't council require one to
Yeah, I believe.
change the ordinance?
So we both would have to, but they would have a public hearing, make their recommendation to us, and then we'd have a public hearing, could then make the decision.
Correct. And that's on changing the ordinances. Once the ordinance is set again, and you're just making decisions based on the ordinance, you guys make those decisions, doesn't go to council. Just want to make that clear. Okay. So we have our own, where do you want to go from here? 'Cause
Well, a couple of places. One thing I would like to do is discuss our conditional use.
Okay.
On here, just because there's a little bit of gray area. Because like I say, in the last one, you recommended a public hearing, so in there, we wouldn't make a decision until we had a public hearing the following month. Now, I've got an issue coming up. Basically, it's gonna be an RM13, which is multiple, housing, 13 per acre. It says 1 and 2 family dwellings are permitted. Well, I've had an individual approach me. Well, we want to do it's a private family school for kids that don't go to school. But they want it in a residential setting, but they don't want to build a house to live in. So basically, as I told them, this is going to be a school. And so I have to treat it as conditional use, so it will be coming to you. Now, the question, I don't know, is it's not required a hearing, but I think, and basically it's going to go over by the swimming pool. I'm going to guess, just like you discussed a few minutes ago, probably you're going to want a hearing just because of the neighbors in the neighborhood should it go, but it's not required. So until y'all make the decision, it's not required. And
Is it listed as a conditional use?
It's listed as a conditional use.
School.
Anything other than 1 and 2 family dwelling in that zone is a conditional use. So I've already told them, I need your architecture drawings, your landscaping drawings, all this and that, and then we have to look at, this is not a residence. When it's all done, they want to kind of design the concept, but not have closets. They'll have egress windows and this and that, but if we're done, this doesn't work out, we want to redo the interior and sell it for our house.
So is it a new property?
It's gonna be a new
New
property,
construction.
a new building. But things we have to look at is number of vehicles, I've got to say, how many people there to bring you the information, and that's what I told her. You need to bring enough information for the board to make this decision. So kind of one thing we need to look at our ordinances on this stuff, you just want to automatically schedule a hearing or not, because a lot of it's gray.
Yeah.
Just right there where it says public hearing, it says a public hearing may be held if the building inspector or planning and zoning board deem a hearing necessary. And it
Right.
a hearing and in the public interest. Well, that was clearly in the public interest to hold the hearing. So you as building inspector can say, yeah, we want a public hearing. You don't have to ask us because you have that authority.
Here's one thing, here's the thing that we have to consider, and I'm okay either way. I just don't want people to feel like they're being discriminated against. If one person comes in to get a conditional use, and he just streams right through, and the next guy comes in, we're like, oh man, we've gotta have a public hearing on that. I don't know, so just think about that. You're absolutely right. One of the things that I want you to think about too, as far as conditional uses and how many ordinances that we're gonna create with conditional uses and everything else. And that is permit required. So once the conditional use is permitted, it says a conditional use permit may be revoked upon failure to comply with conditions precedent to the original approval of the certificate. So there's also the thing of who's going to monitor, or if there's certain, who's going to enforce things if we allow conditional use and it has stipulations and we set certain things and then they don't, at first they're okay and then they become non-compliant. Then, you know what I'm saying? Those are some things that
It's how do we track it through the years?
yeah. So my suggestion would be, I would rather have allowed uses and not allowed uses instead of as many conditional uses. Now, I understand there are some areas where we need them, but that may be something to look at in the future too, and see what are conditional uses, what are allowed and what are not, and fine tune that a little bit too.
Well, and we were going that direction.
Yeah.
We had started a discussion of doing away with as many of the conditional uses as we could and either just make them,
Permitted or not.
yeah,
Yeah,
we were going that direction.
I think that's a good way to go.
One thing, this is that the ones who do the luau training, all that, they've said the state wants us to get away from conditional uses because of all the issues. And so that's another reason why we do that. Another thing is some cities post their conditional use applicants online as a list. You can go look them up to see, if you have a neighbor that's doing something that should be a conditional use, you can look and see if they're on there and what their conditions were to do that. Same with their home occupation permits. They have those posted where the public can readily access them. So there's not that, well, I don't really want to make a stink about it, but I wonder if they're doing it right. Well, you can look it up in some cities and say, this is what it is, And so it should be public record for all these conditions and conditional uses to help with the enforcement, because those who are supposed to enforce can't be everywhere and know what's going on.
Yeah.
And also to know if that's legit what they're doing, and somebody comes in and says, well, so-and-so's doing it. Well, they're actually not on the list,
And for me personally, from my standpoint, I really don't care what's allowed and what's not allowed. As far as I think we got to be really sensitive with that. People have their property, they want to use their property how they want. My only concern is that we're fair with everyone that comes through the door.
Well, that's where it's fair is this is why they have that permit, because it's allowed,
One of the things, just to reiterate, in 1708-070 of ours, it says a person withstanding a defined by section 170308, which means they didn't get their thing approved, shall have the right to appeal the decision of the building inspector to the planning and zoning board. So if it's something that the building inspector decided not to allow, they can come to planning and zoning and appeal that. Appeals from the decision of the planning and zoning board shall be to the city council. So really, the city council doesn't need to see it unless it's gone up the chain.
Where's that at?
That's in 1708-070.
Under conditional use.
So did they,
Yes,
when I was here, I thought that they,
that's variances, and that's.
we changed the variance goes, so the appeal goes to, we had three,
Council.
okay.
The appeal of the conditional use goes to council. The appeal to the
A variance.
variance will actually,
There's three different bodies you can go
It's totally
to.
separate.
a variance, you don't even, according to our codes, which I don't think are correct, and we need to address those. A variance doesn't even go to the planning and zoning. It goes directly to a variance committee, which is made of,
3 people, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, there's three different bodies that you go to.
And I think in the past, there was one person on the utility department.
I don't know where that, I was looking at that.
It's under variances right in.
Is it appeals committee or?
Second chapter. 17, I think it's general, no, let's see, it's 17 zoning.
Go back
And it's under
Appeal.
authorities.
Okay, yeah, right here. I don't like this.
Which one are you on?
So this is. the
It's too
variance.
small for us to see.
Yeah.
Can you, if you hit control and roll your mouse, will it show bigger?
A little bit, yeah.
Can you see that? Okay.
Over on that board too, if that helps you.
There, is that better? A variance, so variances are different than conditional uses. The variance committee shall consist of the mayor or his or her appointed elected official, one city elected official, the city manager or his or her appointee, and the city public works director. I don't like that. I'd rather have again, I don't like elected officials being involved with those types of decisions. So that might be something we need to look at fairly soon. So, I mean, I'm not being mean, Don, I'm talking about myself.
He's just trying to get me out of making decisions. So. He just wants me to come and just say yes all the time.
I'm talking about myself. Yeah, I don't think it's-
I'm kidding you. It's all good, JR. No, I agree. I get it. I think it's hard, especially because, like planning and zoning, they know it, the building people, they know what's going on. And as city council, we don't always know all the details.
If somebody came to me and said, well, or let's say, and I knew that they were very prominent in the community, and I knew if I wanted to get reelected in the next year, if I made them happy, I would get votes. So if I approve something based on that, then, but an appointed person is gonna be there and appointed, period. They don't have to worry about that. That's kind of what I'm getting at. I don't like the fact that there's any elected officials.
Well,
It used to be an appointed 3 or 5 member.
It's been this way since.
There's 3, yeah.
2011 or whatever.
And we never, I don't think we've ever used it.
Right, we've never used it, but
No, this is 2018, I believe, that
no,
this was
it's been
changed.
this way for a long time.
Well, I remember I was on the council when it changed, or I just barely got resigned and I did not like
It
it.
hasn't been, but I think we ought to amend it. But one thing, when anybody comes and talks to me about a variance, in here, in this, if you look in this particular section, it's listed variances, and it's this long, and it says you have to meet all this criteria, or you do not qualify to come for a variance. So I always give them that information as, you need to read through this, and if you don't qualify for every single one of these provisions, they can't grant you a variance. So it's pretty explicit in there, and it gives who's ever on the committee help. It tells you the conditions that they have to meet to be subject to obtain a variance.
So here's state code with variances really quickly. Oh, yeah, you can, sorry. Can you read that?
Yeah.
Any person or entity desiring a waiver or modification of the requirements of a land use ordinance as applied to a parcel of property that he owns, leases, or which he holds some other beneficial interest may apply to the applicable appeal authority, which I think we should change. That's my own personal opinion. For a variance from the terms of the ordinance, the appeal authority may grant a variance only if literal enforcement of the ordinance would cause an unreasonable hardship to the applicant that is not necessary to carry out the general purpose of the land use ordinances. There are special circumstances attached to the property that do not generally apply to the other properties in the same zone. Granting the variance is essential to the enjoyment of a substantial property right possessed by other properties in the same zone. The variance will not substantially affect the general plan and will not be contrary to the public interest. And the spirit of the land use ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done. In determining whether or not enforcement of the land use ordinance would cause unreasonable hardship under section 2A, the appeal authority may not find an unreasonable hardship unless the alleged hardship is located on or associated with the property for which the variance is sought and comes from the circumstances peculiar to the property, not from conditions that are general to the neighborhood. In determining whether or not enforcement of the land use ordinance would cause unreasonable hardship, the appeal authority may not find, let's see, did I read that already?
No.
No.
It's a-
Okay. May find that special circumstances exist only if the special circumstances relate to the hardship complained of and deprive the property of privileges granted to the other properties in the same zone. The applicant shall bear the burden of proving that all the conditions justifying the variance have been met. Variances run with the land, meaning they're not,
They're specific to the parcel.
they're not revoked like a conditional use could be. The appeal authority may not grant a use variance. In granting a variance, the appeal authority may impose additional requirements on the applicant that will mitigate any harmful effects of the variance or serve the purpose of the standard requirement that is waived or modified. So a variance is different than conditional use in that sense.
Sure you have more.
I think there's one that we missed. No, it was up here. And basically, well, you got one more up.
B2.
No, went too far. Went too far. Just right here. And this is one thing we have to look at, because a lot of people want to buy a piece of property and then say, I can't get what it works, but they're the one that calls themselves the problem. But when the hardship is self-imposed or economic, a lot of people want to buy a piece of property and they can't fit a house in it without a variance. But they bought it and they went against the ordinance, they didn't come and ask the question first. That's something that has to be looked at.
I don't know if the hardship is because they purchased the property though. They have a right, there's property rights associated with that. I don't know. That'd be interesting to look.
Well, if you have an R110 and you have the ordinance there and you buy it, knowing that it won't conform to putting a house on it, and then you come to ask for a variance, it's self-imposed.
Well, at some point, those restrictions were put on the property. And so at what point,
I would look at that as, let's take up on Constitution. A lot of that area was subdivided years ago, and setbacks and everything don't conform to the current zoning. A property owner there that wants to do something, I think is eligible for a variance. You know, you kind of got to work with people with whatever, but the self-imposed is the big statement right there.
Well, and I think that's where, that's
That's for the variance committee to decide.
right. But those are the differences, and so I would entertain a proposal to change the variance. I mean,
Change the ordinance for our variance committee.
yeah. That's something you guys can think about.
so what you're looking at right here though,
That we can initiate as a planning and zoning set, or as the
Okay, city council.
city council and send on to you for, but if we did do that, what do you guys think? I know it's kind of, just the ideas out there, but what do they do over there in Duchesne County?
For appeals,
Well,
For
for their
variances.
variance.
What's their variance?
that's a good Mike Hyde question.
Maybe I'll talk to Mike Hyde and just see. I just don't like elected officials being on there. I'm sorry, because that's the reason why we have planning and zoning commission as well, is so that you can be objective. If somebody comes in, you have to make a hard decision. You can make that without feeling like
I know
it's
the
gonna affect you. in
appeals
4 years.
board for the building side is not composed of elected officials, so.
Exactly. So I would say that that ought to be 1 or 2 members of the planning and zoning commission, along with maybe another 1 or 2 members of the public.
Is there any state code in terms of what the committee should be made up of, or?
State code.
That's it, that's all it says, so we can,
You like to say the elected official, does it say, are there designated?
I think they changed this.
That I may not have all the current ones in there, but
Designated who-
So did you guys
Did you talk to the state attorneys? Well, I call him the state attorney. What's his
Have
name?
you guys redone this land use code?
No.
A little bit, didn't we?
The one
Not
that's
much.
going to be-
That's quite a difference.
Oh, David.
David Church, it's Dr. David Church, he says, you want elected officials as far away from your.
No, that's fine, I just didn't know, because you talked about following state code, and we want to make sure we're at least the same, if not even more rigorous. I just want to know if there was if the state code said for the appeals committee for variances, if there was a certain group, if there's not, that's fine.
It does, it doesn't.
So this
but
one-
it says
one of
person or their
Just
designee.
debated about how to handle the property.
That's in our ordinance. That's in our own ordinance.
No, right, that's what I'm saying, if it's on our own ordinance, I think that's easy to change. If the state doesn't have a code, I'm perfectly fine with what you said. I just don't want to change our code and then find out the state has a requirement, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
That's all I'm saying, I don't,
So, this is interesting. So I was used to a completely different one. So someone has gone in and changed it, not gone through the official process. So this is the old process.
This old book, you can't throw that book anymore. You can throw that in your garbage can.
I know, but that's.
Well, it hasn't been
That's what he
approved, has
said.
it?
Let's see.
Well, a lot of it has laws out. I do not refer to that book, Chris. If it's not in the title up on our land use.
So
code,
who made those changes in the book without going through the council or through the planning?
It's been to the council.
They
Any
could have.
changes have been.
There were several,
You can't refer to this book anymore. You have to go to our land use titles, either in the office or online.
There were-
Those are most current.
there
Do you
were a lot
remember,
that were changed in 2018.
were they changed through the
We've
process?
been trying
I
to,
watched some of them go through that I didn't think were too cool.
There were some that didn't go through the planning and zoning before they went to council. They were changed at council only.
So I think they did go through the proper process. However, it doesn't mean that they can't be looked at and adjusted. Like Chris said, we don't want to be finagling with the ordinances all the time, but we do want to get them right. And
Yeah, and I'm perfectly,
Makes a good point.
as long as the state doesn't say we have to have them, I'd rather get them off too. I think that's a reasonable statement. I just don't want to, if the state says we need someone, let's make
That
sure we
was
have.
yours, isn't
If
it?
the
Yeah.
state has a requirement.
I don't
that's all
use it
I'm
much, I just brought it tonight because I thought we were gonna be discussing it,
Oh, yeah.
but apparently
I've got one at home too. I don't even bring it anymore because
Yeah.
it's all been
changed, yeah.
changed.
So if you go to chapter 9, you have subdivisions under 6, you have land use regulations under 5, general plan, and then your appeals authority variances under 7. So title 10, but 9A is all your municipal land use developments, so.
So, but at appeal authority and variances, it doesn't say anything about who makes up the committee or anything. It just says what's
Correct.
required.
The only thing that I've heard, and that's why I have the feeling that I do, is Dave Church says you don't want any of your land
Right.
uses.
And I'm fine with that. I just don't want to change it and then find out later that the state requires someone, right?
Right.
That's
Well,
all I'm
why
saying.
We would go through this thoroughly. Like,
Right.
all the changes that we're making currently in the city are all pulling us back into.
Right, and I'm all for following state code. I think that keeps us out of trouble, you know?
Yeah, I get that. Anyway, are there any other questions on, that's a lot of information and not a lot of time, and I know it's just a lot of reading code and those types of things, but.
I going back to the open meetings or not, what do we call them? Public hearings. I'm wondering if maybe there was a standard that could be, maybe as you guys kind of think about it, because I'm just thinking out loud, if it's gonna affect, a large area, like you said with this one coming up with this school and parking and stuff, to me, it feels like a public hearing possibly. The Moon Lake one feels like, but I could see others where it may not be as big of a need for a public hearing because it's not gonna affect as many.
In my mind, it should come from zone. I
Right.
don't like it saying that I make the decision whether it's hearing, because then there's the question of, well, maybe he should and maybe he shouldn't. It either is they don't, or they do, or they come to zoning to make the decision, does it go to a hearing? That's how I see we stay out of trouble.
And that's why I'm thinking if you had some sort of minimum guideline, like if it met these guidelines, then yes, we better have a public hearing. And I don't know what those are, I'm just throwing out a suggestion.
One thing to consider as well,
Yeah, and I agree with that.
is basically regardless of whether we have a public hearing or not, the decision has to be made by the planning and zoning.
Right,
It's a little bit more work to have a public hearing, but you're having the meeting anyway, and you can have the public hearing during your regularly scheduled meeting. That's something to consider as well. It's really not that much more work to be transparent.
and I'm not trying to say you have to make some guideline, I'm just throwing that as a suggestion that, you know, as if you're considering public or not, that might be something to consider. If some meets some threshold, then yes, we automatically know we're gonna have a public meeting. If it doesn't, then, you know, it's up to, but I like that it's up to you guys.
Last time we had a discussion on how many people, if the people should be notified too, you know? Like, it'd be nice to have a standard of.
Here's your minutes of meeting.
There's a rule. There's a rule that states 300 feet.
Well, the rule, the 300 feet just applies to zoning change or a ruling deal.
Right.
It doesn't apply to, the other ones,
To a conditional use.
yeah. So conditional use, you don't even have to send notifications.
Well, we could just say on conditional use, we're not doing a public hearing, and that's okay if that's what you guys want to do, because the code says, right, they don't have to have a public hearing on that.
And state code says the same.
And so you're okay if you just say, you know what, we don't want to deal with that, but it feels like there may be situations that it might be nice to have that, right? And all I'm saying is, it's obviously a case by case, but if you're concerned about when and not, maybe if you kind of either think about the situation or have some sort of threshold that if it's gonna affect a certain amount of people or where it's located, then yes, we want, I don't know, I'm not trying to tell you how to do anything, I'm just trying to get you to think a little bit about it, because I would support whatever you guys decide as a city councilman. I don't know.
In the past, kind of standard, the notification range was 300 feet. That's
Right.
kind of been, I don't remember just how it was come up with a lot. But in everything, in code and everything else, you have to come up with a number.
Well, and let's
You can't pick and choose.
that's something that we can look at, and we can identify those parameters that we're gonna work within. So state code's gonna dictate some of that, and some of that's gonna be based on us. So maybe we'll dig into that a little further and.
So JR, how does it work if, like, he's just wanting an opinion of what we recommend? We can't do that by email then before the meeting.
What's that?
No, it has to be done in the meeting.
Say that again.
So like if Dean's wondering if we think there should be a public meeting, that can't be done by email. You can't send out an email and say, is your guys' opinion I should do a public meeting for this?
Here's the deal. Okay, so I got accused of breaking OPMA laws several times in the last 6 months. Yeah, because I was sending out, and this is what was funny, is I was asking, because I wanted to hold a special meeting for the council. So I sent out the question. I sent it out to each individual. You weren't on the council then. I sent it out to each individual councilman separately, trying to make sure that they didn't respond in a group email. So there are ways to do that.
Well, that's the hub method of the Brown's Law. Can't pull people individually.
Can't get more than 3 together.
You can't get more than 3 together, but you can. And I did that according to Grant Charles' recommendation. Now, I realized after the fact that the mayor or I think 2 councilmen, so if there are 2 councilmen that want to call a special meeting, they can call a special meeting. The mayor can call a special meeting without. But what I'm getting at is, I think it would be okay if it was just sending out individually saying, do you think we ought to have, I still go back to what Councilman Busenbark said and just set some parameters of what would dictate when you would want to have one or not, or just have them all the time. Any other?
I have a question.
Yeah, Chris.
So from a legal standpoint, what is the point of a public hearing? Legally speaking.
Legally, there are certain times that you have to legally have one.
Right, but what is the goal? Like, maybe I said that wrong. What is the
It's
goal
always-
legally?
So-
So what is the downfall's not the right word. What is the negative aspect of having a public hearing if you don't need it?
A public hearing, just because you get negative input doesn't mean that you can rule with public sentiment. You have to rule
Correct.
on the conditions.
So-
So it's just basically a convenience thing.
Chris, what a public hearing allows is the public to talk.
Right.
Public is always allowed to come to our meetings, but that
But they're
doesn't
not
mean
always
they can-
allowed to say anything.
They're not allowed to say
wi-
anything
without being,
without being addressed. With the public hearing, you're just allowing the public a chance to have their voice. That's
right, and that's what I'm saying.
That's the
What's-
point of it, is
So
to
what's
give the
the
public a
drawback
voice.
to just doing one?
Because it takes.
Is
to
just
have- to
convenience.
have one,
it's just the
Because
extra
the way our
notification.
Publishes, you know, I have to get it, it has to be in the paper, it has to be to them the Thursday before the first Tuesday, it'll be in the paper. I mean, it's also.
So it's a timing issue as well, that it pushes it out
Carolyn, I think we
further.
need to look that up. I think it's, for certain public notices it does, but I don't think for all public notices.
You're right. I mean, it.
All
has to be
public
paper.
hearings.
No, not all public,
We're talking about hearings.
Instead of.
all public hearings, I don't think have to have the.
Sorry, Chair, Chair.
I need to look it
was just
up,
gonna
but-
say, instead of like going back and forth on what the legal and not, let's not spend a lot of time with that.
Yeah.
Because we can find those answers out and we can bring them back to the next meeting and it doesn't, but.
I'm just asking
Yeah.
why not just do it?
And that's a good question.
I mean, if there's any question at all, why not just do it?
Well, and here's the other thing, with the way, now that we're running the way we're supposed to, now that we understand that it doesn't have to go to council, we're saving them an extra meeting anyway.
Yeah,
And so we're already streamlining the process. So that, why don't you guys think about that and come up with it, whatever you decide, like Councilman Dusenberg said, we'll support you, as long as it's consistent.
Right, that's what I would agree with. It's consistent, whether you have them all the time, or you don't have them, or you have a parameter set, just so we know.
Now, our deadline to get on the agenda isn't long enough. If he determines, oh my gosh, you know, he gets the application and, oh, we gotta have a public hearing, they're not gonna be able to come to the next meeting anyway.
Right.
Deadline's normally 10 days prior.
So they can come to
For
this
get on the
body.
agenda, We have to have, you know.
Right.
and that's why I asked that question, because I
So we
wanted to
just
know if
changed
that
the
was the
deadline.
The
case.
land use things, I spent 3 months, it was a minimum of 3 months, and I mean, I did it as efficiently as I possibly could. It took me 3 months to get a zoning changed in Duchesne County. These things don't,
They don't happen quickly.
so we've got to remember that. We want to be as accommodating as we can, but ultimately, we're trading efficiency for transparency, and so we've got to make sure we've got a good balance. The other thing, as it comes to why don't we do certain things and to streamline some of the processes, and we can talk about this another time, but I just wanted to put this bug in your ear, or plant the seed that in our subdivisions ordinances, it doesn't matter if it's a lot line adjustment or a minor subdivision or a major subdivision, they all come before our city council. I personally believe that a light line adjustment can be done at Bean or this level. It doesn't need to come before city council, so that may be a consideration to change that ordinance and say, all right, as long as it fits within these parameters, it doesn't need to come before council. If it's a lot line adjustment and you're adjusting 3 different properties and,
And it still requires a mayor's
A lot of
signature.
people
well,
complain about that.
the,
We've had people say, why do I have to go to council? Looks like once you guys approve it, it should be.
yeah.
It's
And with a lot
ordinance
line,
at the time.
with a lot line adjustment, the ordinance dictates and states in a certain zoning, you have to have this size of lot, square footage. As long as that's maintained, I don't care how you change that, I don't even want to see it. We shouldn't even see it. And even a minor subdivision, as long as it fits, if it's just a lot split, let's say, so you're taking one lot and splitting and making 2, as long as there's access and it still conforms to the zoning and everything else,
Okay. And for clarification, we no longer have a lot split. Everything is either a minor subdivision or subdivision.
so that lot split would be a minor subdivision, but you get what so that may be an ordinance in the future that we look at to streamline some of that. Because in all reality, it makes no difference, as long as we're following the ordinances, and you guys are the administrative body to do that.
And usually if somebody's splitting, I do my best to work with them. Their surveyor calls me and they usually know our requirements for zoning. And so when I critique it, because I try to get an electronic copy ahead, and I try to make sure it fits our ordinance before it even comes before this body.
Two things. I have another meeting at 7, so I don't know how long we're gonna be, but
I'm done unless
Um,
you guys.
the one that came before us, that we didn't send a recommendation on to the council, that was a twin home in a.
Yeah.
Is that something that we should have decided here?
I think those are,
That was a zone change.
I
Yeah.
always like to see a decision made. That's a zone change and that would have had to come to,
Has to.
Council of Moldamy.
Has to, because.
but I would have rather it not come to council until you guys make a decision one way or the other. Just because you guys are there to do that. Council is there to ratify it and those types of things, but
Well, and it's easier for us to do it if we know your decision.
Right. Right.
you guys are, like, you already read the state code where you guys are to recommend all their things to the council. And that's why it's here, and it's because you're an objective board. So if we don't get a decision or a confirmed positive or negative, it puts us in a tough spot. Because
Didn't we vote on that one though, and it just,
We voted.
we didn't have enough votes to recommend it?
Yeah, there was
and we
no,
denied it, and the reason is because it didn't fit, the council didn't feel that it fit the neighborhood, and there's other areas in the city that
That are zoned that.
we could actually zone
Put
that
that-
in
they're not
larger
zoned,
areas.
we don't have, nowhere.
Yeah, there's nowhere that's zoned that way
But that's
now.
Now,
Some of them go this way.
what I
some
would
of them go south.
recommend to the planning and zoning is put that on your agenda. And if that's the zoning that we want, and then we can do I think I read in state code where you can do a multi-zone too, where you can have an overlying
Yeah.
zone, so you can have a multi-unit or.
Multi-use.
Like two zones in the same
multi-family
area?
housing, what am I trying
An
to say?
overlay zone, you can do overlay zone, so this is R110 over here, but we can overlay it with R16 in this area. But preferred is the R110, you know,
Yeah, and what I would like to see is like, we have multi-family.
that's an overlays are, is there two ways?
It's an overlay, but we can add an R2 into
Yeah.
multi-family type.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking, is do that, so that may be something that you do in a upcoming meeting, is look at areas in the city where we would want the R2, and then designate that, so that it's a plan, and it becomes a part of our master plan instead of. plugging it in here and there.
Yeah.
Has that R2 been posted, like it's on the, Codified.
It's not codified yet, and the reason it's not, the codification people sent it back because they had problems. I've talked to Grant about it, I've talked to him a little bit, I think it needs to be written, because it's split up, it's going into title 17, 18, and everything else, and it's gonna be just like, conditional uses in 4. It needs to have the first two definitions that go into chapter 1, and then we need to make a chapter 22, which is all the provisions of an R2. And just like you say, you can overlay them, but if we don't, you're not gonna have all the provisions and they're gonna get lost and everything else. And that's the problem. So I talked to Grant, so I think we need to look at rewriting that ordinance to clarify it. So when you go to our ordinances, it's all right there. You're not trying to go through a couple ordinances and miss everything and find it. So I've got to sit down with Grant when he has time. Maybe in a month. I talked to him about what we need to look at.
That ordinance so when we were looking at it, I thought that ordinance got shot down by council.
I thought it was
No,
passed.
it went through council and it was signed, but it disappeared. And the only reason it reappeared is because somebody brought it up and I went back through the planning and zoning records and found that it was passed, and then Lee found it with Carolyn's help, and it's all signed. And so we were working on getting it codified, but there's problems in the codification.
When was it done?
We'll get that
Yeah.
information after the meeting. Write your questions down.
And maybe just one more comment on conditional use. I wasn't here. I thought planning and zoning sent the wrong people because kind of like questions like the road. they should have sent a representative up, but you could have said what grade of road, what kind of road are you bringing in? Because I watched it, the questions weren't asked on what are you doing, it was stated we need. So people are coming in, I'm telling them, bring in some good plans, be prepared to tell people what you want to do, so if you've got a question, you say, hey, what are you doing? And then we can set conditions and we're in places where we might not need to. Because when I went and sat down with Moon Lake before we went to council, we went over a lot of these deals, what are you doing here, what are you doing there, as far as size of road and stuff like that. But I'm trying to get you more information for the person coming in, so you can make a better decision.
And that's where that.
Great meeting, good meeting.
One thing that I will say, and then I'm done, Chairman, and that is, if you do have a situation, I know the outbuilding one was a situation where there was some differing of opinions. In that situation, what I would say, and for any future situations like that, I would just say, based on our codes, you deny that. But if you feel like that needs to be changed, then either the person that has been denied can petition, can go through the petition process to get that changed. And I read through it, and it's basically they write a petition to get the ordinance changed. And we can go through the process to change the ordinance, and if the ordinance changed, then we can allow that use. So if any on the planning and zoning feel that there, as you go through our ordinances, you see areas where we may need to adjust, you can feel free to make those suggestions and to petition the council to change those, and we'll go through that process.
Is that a specific form that would need to be filled out, or just someone's personal statement? How does that happen?
It's a form, and I got with the individual that was involved with that. Finally, I swear there's another place where you can get a certain amount of signatures by registered voters and force the ordinance through. I could not find that, and I looked, but there is in Title II, 36, I believe.
My question would be, can the force ordinance through or force it to a vote of the public?
I think it forces through as a vote.
That's what I would think. They can bring it up to a vote of the general public.
Right here. So in 236.050, changes in zoning, petition for change, in each instant where any person shall desire to have such change made, petition shall be made to the governing body, definitely setting out such request and particularizing the change desired. There's a filing fee, a publication charge, the same petition is filed. So there is an actual, we probably should have a petition letter or something that they can fill out. They can go through that process and try to have that ordinance changed individually.
Okay.
But if the planning and zoning commission feels like, as a whole, that needs to be done, then
We could initiate that.
initiate that as well.
It does say indeed a referral to the planning commission.
I gotta go.
Well,
Yeah. Planning commission shall return such petition together with its recommendation to the governing body. So you guys are going to see that petition anyway. Whether
within
you
30
initiate
days
it or
after
not,
we.
and then we'll go to the governing body for that, to see if we're going to codify it or not.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry, that was a longer meeting than I anticipated.
That was good meeting,
But I hope that,
good discussion.
Yeah, thanks for the training tonight. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Lynn,
I'll second.
second by Chris Squire. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
thank you guys.
Is that a motion that's ever been opposed?
To
adjourn?
That doesn't matter if it is or not. It still will go through.
Yeah.
That's one of the few.
I'm just wondering if anybody has ever opposed that one.
In big cities they have.
They have?
Yeah,
Really?
because somebody's trying to stop a meeting to stop a discussion.
Oh, and so
And so they're trying to, others are trying to stop the meeting.
And so
They're trying to
they
close the
oppose
meeting, so they oppose.
Okay, yeah, that would
Oppose
make
adjourning,
sense.
because they want to keep on discussing.
I guess that would make sense.